Sarah Martinez had always been different from other soldiers on the military base. At 23, she was one of the youngest female recruits to ever make it through the intensive training program. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a perfect military bun, and her uniform was pressed to perfection. But what set Sarah apart wasn't just her dedication to following rules. It was her unwavering compassion for others. The morning started like any other at Fort Henderson. Sarah woke up at 5 in the morning, made her bed with hospital corners, and prepared for another day of rigorous training. She had been at the base for 8 months now, and every day brought new challenges. The other soldiers respected her, but she often felt like an outsider. Being a woman in a predominantly male environment wasn't easy, and she had to work twice as hard to prove herself worthy of being there. General Robert Harrison was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. At 55 years old, he had served his country for over 30 years. His gray hair was always perfectly styled, and his medals gleamed on his chest. Everyone on the base knew his reputation. He was tough, demanding, and had zero tolerance for weakness. Soldiers would straighten their backs and hold their breath when he walked by. His voice could silence a room full of chattering recruits in seconds. On this particular Tuesday morning, Sarah was running late for formation. She had stayed up the night before helping a fellow soldier, Private Johnson, who was struggling with homesickness. Johnson was only 19 and had never been away from his family before. Sarah had found him crying behind the mess hall, and instead of reporting him or walking away, she sat with him for hours, listening to his fears and offering comfort. Because of her late night, Sarah's alarm didn't wake her up as usual. She rushed through her morning routine, but her hair wasn't sitting right. No matter how hard she tried, pieces kept falling out of her bun. She looked in the mirror and saw strands hanging loose around her face. In the military, appearance standards were strict, and messy hair was definitely not acceptable. Sarah knew she was in trouble, but she couldn't miss formation. She grabbed her cap and hoped it would hide the imperfect hair underneath. As she ran across the courtyard, she could see other soldiers already lined up in perfect rows. Her heart was pounding, not just from running, but from anxiety about what would happen when the officers noticed her tardiness. The formation was already in progress when Sarah quietly slipped into the back row. She tried to blend in with the other soldiers, keeping her head down and hoping no one would notice her late arrival. The morning briefing was about upcoming training exercises, new safety protocols, and changes to the mess hall schedule. Sarah listened carefully, taking mental notes of everything being said. That's when General Harrison began his walk through the ranks. This was something he did regularly, inspecting soldiers, checking their uniforms, and making sure everyone met the high standards expected at Fort Henderson. His footsteps echoed across the concrete as he moved from soldier to soldier. Some he passed without comment, others received a nod of approval, and a few got stern looks for minor infractions. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized the general was heading in her direction. She stood as straight as possible, staring directly ahead, hoping her loose hair wasn't visible under her cap. But luck wasn't on her side that morning. A gust of wind caught her cap just as General Harrison approached her section, and several strands of her dark hair blew across her face. The entire formation seemed to hold its breath as General Harrison stopped directly in front of Sarah. His steel-gray eyes looked her up and down, taking in every detail of her appearance. Sarah could feel sweat beading on her forehead, but she didn't dare move to wipe it away. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. Without warning, General Harrison reached up and yanked Sarah's hair hard, pulling several strands completely out of her carefully constructed bun. The sudden sharp pain made Sarah's eyes water, but she didn't cry out. She bit her lip and maintained her military posture, even as her hair fell around her shoulders in a messy cascade. The other soldiers watched in shock. Some had seen the general be tough before, but this seemed different, more personal somehow. Sarah's friend, Private Rodriguez, clenched his fists at his sides, wanting to defend her but knowing that any movement would only make things worse for everyone involved. General Harrison held the strands of Sarah's hair in his hand for a moment, examining them as if they were evidence of some terrible crime. His face was expressionless, giving no hint of what he was thinking or what he planned to do next. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, making him look even more intimidating than usual. Sarah's mind raced with thoughts about what this meant for her military career. Would she be written up? Would this go on her permanent record? She had worked so hard to build a good reputation at the base, and now it felt like everything was falling apart because of one morning when she overslept. The other soldiers began to whisper among themselves, wondering what would happen next. Some felt sorry for Sarah, while others thought she deserved whatever punishment was coming for not maintaining proper appearance standards. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, but as General Harrison continued to stare at Sarah, something unexpected began to happen. His stern expression started to soften, almost imperceptibly at first. Those who knew him well might have noticed the slight change in his eyes, but to most observers, he still looked as intimidating as ever. Sarah remained perfectly still, waiting for whatever consequence was about to come her way. She thought about her family back home who were so proud of her for serving her country. She thought about all the obstacles she had overcome to get to this point in her military career, and she thought about Private Johnson, whom she had helped the night before, wondering if her kindness to him had been worth the trouble she was now facing. What happened next completely shocked everyone present at the formation that morning. Instead of shouting at Sarah or ordering her to report to his office for disciplinary action, General Harrison did something that no one expected. He gently tucked the loose strands of hair behind her ear, his rough, weathered hands surprisingly gentle against her face. The entire base seemed to freeze in time. Soldiers who had been holding their breath finally exhaled, but their confusion only deepened. This was the same General Harrison who had made grown men cry during training exercises. The same man who once made an entire platoon do push-ups in the rain because one soldier's boots weren't shiny enough. Yet here he was, showing tenderness to a young female soldier who had clearly violated appearance regulations. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, but she maintained her military bearing. She could feel the warmth of the general's hand as he carefully arranged her hair, making sure every strand was properly in place. His touch was gentle, almost fatherly, and it reminded her of how her own father used to fix her hair when she was a little girl getting ready for school. The general stepped back and looked at Sarah with an expression that was completely different from his usual stern demeanor. For just a moment his eyes seemed distant, as if he was remembering something from long ago. The other soldiers watched in stunned silence, unable to process what they were witnessing. "Your hair reminds me of my daughter's," General Harrison said quietly, his voice so low that only Sarah and the soldiers immediately around her could hear him. She used to have trouble keeping it neat too, especially when she was in a hurry. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The general never talked about his personal life with the troops. In fact, most soldiers didn't even know he had a family. He was always strictly professional, keeping his private affairs completely separate from his military duties. But something about this moment seemed to have broken down those carefully constructed walls. The formation continued around them, but it was clear that everyone's attention was focused on the unusual interaction between the general and Sarah. Some soldiers craned their necks to get a better view, while others tried to act like they weren't paying attention, even though they were hanging on every word and gesture. General Harrison's hands moved with practiced ease as he helped Sarah fix her hair properly. It was obvious that he had done this many times before, probably for his own daughter. His movements were confident and caring, the complete opposite of the harsh action that had started this entire incident. "My daughter Emily was about your age when she decided to join the Peace Corps," the general continued, his voice still quiet but carrying clearly in the morning air. "She wanted to help people just like you helped Private Johnson last night." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. How did the general know about her helping Johnson? She had thought their conversation behind the mess hall was private, but apparently nothing happened on this base without the general's knowledge. As he finished arranging her hair, General Harrison's expression grew more serious, but not in the intimidating way that soldiers were used to. Instead, there was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a pain that seemed to run very deep. "Emily was working in a small village in Guatemala when the earthquake hit," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now. "She was helping to build a school for the local children. The building collapsed and she was trapped inside with 3 kids she was trying to protect. The soldiers around them could sense that something important was happening, even if they couldn't hear all the details. Some of them had heard rumors about the general losing a family member, but no one knew the specifics. The base was usually full of gossip and speculation. But when it came to General Harrison's personal life, there was only silence and respect. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she began to understand what the general was telling her. She wanted to say something, to offer comfort or express her sympathy, but she wasn't sure what words would be appropriate. The military had taught her many things, but how to comfort a grieving father wasn't one of them. She saved those 3 children, General Harrison continued, his hands still gently working with Sarah's hair. The rescue workers found her covering them with her own body. The kids didn't have a scratch on them, but Emily, she didn't make it out. The weight of this revelation settled over the formation like a heavy blanket. Even the soldiers who couldn't hear the specific words could sense the emotional gravity of the moment. This was their commanding officer, a man they had viewed as almost superhuman in his strength and authority, revealing his deepest pain to a young soldier he had just met. Sarah's voice was thick with emotion when she finally spoke. "Sir, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your daughter sounds like she was an amazing person." General Harrison finished with her hair and stepped back, his professional demeanor slowly returning but not completely masking the vulnerability he had just shown. "She was. And you remind me of her, not just in appearance but in spirit. The way you stayed up all night comforting Johnson. The way you put others' needs before your own. That's exactly the kind of person Emily was." The comparison between Sarah and his late daughter was both an incredible honor and a heavy responsibility. Sarah felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders, but it wasn't an unwelcome burden. Instead, it felt like a calling, a reminder of why she had joined the military in the first place. "I was wrong to handle your hair the way I did initially," the general said, his voice returning to its normal volume so that more soldiers could hear him. "It was unprofessional and inappropriate, regardless of the regulations you may have violated." This admission of fault from their commanding officer was perhaps even more shocking to the assembled soldiers than his gentle treatment of Sarah had been. General Harrison was not known for admitting mistakes or showing any sign of weakness. Yet here he was, publicly acknowledging that he had acted inappropriately. The morning sun was now fully up, casting long shadows across the formation. Birds were beginning to sing in the nearby trees, and the normal sounds of a military base coming to life could be heard in the distance. But for this group of soldiers, the world had shifted in some fundamental way during the past few minutes. The transformation in General Harrison's demeanor continued to ripple through the formation like stones thrown into still water. Sarah could see the confusion and curiosity in her fellow soldiers' faces as they tried to process what they had witnessed. This wasn't the general they thought they knew. The man who had just shown such tenderness and vulnerability was someone entirely different from the stern commander who usually led their morning formations. "Martinez," General Harrison said, using Sarah's last name in the formal military manner. But his tone was gentle rather than commanding. "I want to speak with you privately after formation. Report to my office at 0900 hours. Sarah nodded, her mind racing with possibilities about what this private meeting might entail. Was she still in trouble for her appearance violation? Would the general want to talk more about his daughter? Or was this going to be some kind of special assignment, based on the comparison he had drawn between her and Emily? As the general moved away to continue his inspection of the other soldiers, Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her. Some of her fellow soldiers looked envious, wondering what made her special enough to receive such unusual treatment from their commanding officer. Others seemed concerned, unsure whether what they had witnessed was a good thing or a bad thing for Sarah's military career. Private Rodriguez, who had been Sarah's friend since basic training, caught her eye and raised his eyebrows questioningly. Sarah gave him a small shrug, indicating that she was just as confused as everyone else about what had happened. She tried to focus on the rest of the formation, but her mind kept wandering back to the general's words about his daughter. The remainder of the morning inspection passed without incident. General Harrison returned to his usual professional demeanor, checking uniforms and equipment with his typical attention to detail. But there was something different about him now, a subtle softness around the edges that hadn't been there before. Several soldiers noticed that he seemed less harsh in his critiques, more patient with minor infractions. When formation was finally dismissed, Sarah was surrounded by curious soldiers asking questions she couldn't answer. What was that all about? Why did he tell you about his daughter? Are you going to get in trouble? She politely deflected their questions, explaining that she didn't know any more than they did about what had happened or what it meant. Sarah spent the next 2 hours trying to concentrate on her regular duties, but it was nearly impossible. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, remembering the gentle touch of the general's hands in her hair and the pain in his voice when he spoke about Emily. She found herself wondering what his daughter had been like, whether they really were as similar as he seemed to think. At exactly 0900 hours, Sarah knocked on the door of General Harrison's office. The room was exactly what she had expected. Spartanly decorated with military precision, dominated by a large desk covered with neat stacks of paperwork. The walls were lined with commendations, photographs of the general with various dignitaries, and maps of different military operations he had overseen throughout his career. But what caught Sarah's attention immediately was a small, framed photograph on the corner of his desk that she hadn't noticed during her previous brief visits to his office. It showed a young woman with dark hair remarkably similar to Sarah's own, wearing a Peace Corps t-shirt and smiling broadly, while surrounded by a group of children. The resemblance was striking enough that Sarah had to do a double take. "Please sit down," General Harrison said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. His voice was back to its normal authoritative tone, but there was still an underlying gentleness that hadn't been there before this morning's incident. Sarah sat down carefully, maintaining her military posture even in the more relaxed setting of the general's private office. She wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation, but she was determined to handle it with the same professionalism she brought to all her military duties. General Harrison was quiet for several long moments, studying Sarah's face with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. She could see him comparing her features to those in the photograph of his daughter, noting similarities and differences. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and began to speak. "I owe you an explanation for what happened this morning," he said. "My behavior was unprofessional, and it put you in an uncomfortable position in front of your peers. That wasn't fair to you, regardless of my personal feelings or memories." Sarah started to protest, to say that she understood and that no explanation was necessary, but the general held up his hand to stop her. It was clear that he needed to say these things, perhaps as much for his own benefit as for hers. "Emily died 3 years ago," he continued, his voice steady but with an underlying current of emotion. "For a long time after that, I threw myself completely into my work here. I became harder on the soldiers, more demanding, less tolerant of mistakes. I told myself it was about maintaining standards, but the truth was that I was angry at the world and taking it out on everyone around me." Sarah listened intently, understanding now why the general had developed such a reputation for being difficult and unforgiving. Grief could change people in profound ways, and apparently, it had made him retreat behind an even thicker wall of military discipline and emotional distance. "This morning, when I saw you with your hair down, looking so much like Emily did when she was rushing off to help someone else, something broke inside me," the general admitted. "For just a moment I forgot where I was and who I was supposed to be. I reacted as a father, not as your commanding officer." The honesty in his words was both touching and surprising. Sarah had never heard any of the base's officers speak so openly about their personal struggles or admit to such vulnerability. It was a side of military leadership that wasn't covered in any of the training manuals. "Your daughter sounds like she was an incredible person," Sarah said softly. "I'm honored that you see any similarity between us. But I hope you know that I could never replace her or fill that void in your life." General Harrison smiled sadly, the first genuine smile Sarah had ever seen from him. "I'm not looking for a replacement, Martinez, but seeing you this morning reminded me of something important that I had forgotten in my grief. Emily didn't join the Peace Corps to honor me or to continue some family tradition of service. She did it because she genuinely wanted to help people, just like you helped Johnson last night." Sarah felt a warm glow spreading through her chest at his words. The comparison to his daughter was both humbling and inspiring, motivating her to live up to the example that Emily had apparently set. General Harrison opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a manila folder that looked well worn from frequent handling. Sarah watched as he carefully opened it, revealing what appeared to be letters, photographs, and official documents. The way he handled these items told her immediately that they were precious to him. "These are Emily's letters from Guatemala," he explained, his voice soft with memory. "She wrote to me every week, telling me about the people she was helping, the children she was teaching, the difference she was making in their lives. I used to read them and worry about her safety. Wish she had chosen a safer way to serve others." He pulled out one of the letters, the paper yellowed slightly with age, and handed it to Sarah. "Read this one." It was written just 2 weeks before the earthquake. Sarah took the letter carefully as if it were made of fragile glass. The handwriting was neat and enthusiastic, with little doodles in the margins that spoke of a young woman full of life and energy. As she read, she could almost hear Emily's voice in the words. "Dad," the letter began, "I know you worry about me being so far from home, but I want you to understand something important. Yesterday, I helped a little girl named Maria learn to read her first complete sentence. The joy on her face when she realized she could understand the words was worth every risk I've taken to be here. This is what service really means. Not just following orders or maintaining discipline, but actually making a difference in someone's life." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she continued reading. Emily wrote about building friendships with the local families, about learning Spanish from the children she taught, about discovering strength in herself that she never knew existed. But what struck Sarah most was the similarity between Emily's motivations and her own reasons for joining the military. "She sounds exactly like someone I would have loved to know," Sarah said, carefully handing the letter back to the general. "I can see why you're proud of her." General Harrison carefully placed the letter back in the folder, but not before looking at it one more time himself. "The thing is, Martinez, for the past 3 years, I've been so focused on the fact that Emily died serving others that I forgot to celebrate the fact that she lived serving others. Her death was tragic, but her life was beautiful." This perspective shift seemed to be something the general was working through in real time, as if speaking the words out loud was helping him process feelings he had been carrying for years. Sarah felt privileged to be part of this moment of personal growth and healing. "When I saw you helping Johnson last night." "Yes, I know about it because little happens on this base without my knowledge. It reminded me that Emily's spirit lives on in people like you," the general continued. "Young people who choose to put others' needs before their own, who see service as more than just duty, but as a calling to make the world better." Sarah shifted in her chair, still somewhat uncomfortable with the comparison, but beginning to understand the deeper meaning behind the general's words. This wasn't really about her specifically, but about what she represented: hope, compassion, and the continuation of values that his daughter had embodied. "Sir, may I ask you something?" Sarah said hesitantly. General Harrison nodded for her to continue. "What happened this morning with my hair? Was that the first time you've thought about your daughter since she died?" The question seemed to surprise him, and he was quiet for a long moment before answering. "No, I think about Emily every day, but this morning was the first time I remembered her with joy instead of just pain. For 3 years, every memory of her has been clouded by the circumstances of her death. Today, for the first time, I remembered what it felt like to be proud of her choices while she was alive." This admission opened up a new understanding between them. Sarah realized that she had been present for a moment of healing that had been years in the making. The general wasn't just sharing his grief with her. He was sharing his rediscovery of hope and pride in his daughter's legacy. "I have a confession to make," General Harrison said, leaning forward slightly in his chair. "I've been watching you since you arrived at this base, not in any inappropriate way, but because your personnel file indicated that you had specifically requested assignment to units that focus on humanitarian missions within military operations." Sarah nodded, remembering the paperwork she had filled out during her assignment process. She had indeed expressed interest in military roles that involved helping civilian populations, disaster relief, and community outreach programs. "That's exactly the kind of service Emily believed in," the general continued. "She used to argue with me about the military's role in the world, saying that our greatest strength came not from our weapons, but from our ability to help people in crisis. I thought she was naive then, but now I'm beginning to see the wisdom in her perspective." The conversation was taking a direction that Sarah hadn't expected. What had started as a disciplinary meeting was turning into something much more meaningful, a discussion about purpose, service, and the ways that loss could either break people down or inspire them to grow. "I've been thinking about starting a new program here at the base," General Harrison said, pulling out another folder from his desk drawer. "A community outreach initiative that would allow our soldiers to volunteer with local schools, help with disaster preparedness training, and support various humanitarian efforts in the surrounding area." Sarah's eyes lit up with interest. This was exactly the kind of work she had hoped to do when she joined the military. The idea of combining her military training with direct service to communities was incredibly appealing. "I need someone to help me develop and lead this program," the general continued. "Someone who understands that true strength comes from helping others, not just from following orders. Someone who reminds me that there are still people in the world like my daughter, people who choose compassion over convenience." The implication of his words was clear, but Sarah wanted to make sure she understood correctly. "Sir, are you offering me the opportunity to work on this program?" "I'm offering you the opportunity to create this program with me," he corrected. "It would be additional duty on top of your regular responsibilities, and it would require you to work closely with civilian organizations, schools, and community leaders. It's not going to be easy, and it's certainly not going to advance your military career in any traditional sense." But Sarah could hear the excitement in his voice, and she could see how this project was already helping him reconnect with positive memories of his daughter. The idea of being part of something that honored Emily's memory while also serving others was incredibly meaningful to her. Sarah felt her heart racing with excitement as she considered the general's proposal. This was more than just an assignment. It was an opportunity to make the kind of difference she had dreamed about when she first decided to join the military. But she also understood the weight of responsibility that came with it, especially given the personal significance this project held for General Harrison. "Sir, I would be honored to work on this program with you," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "But I want you to know that I take this responsibility seriously. I understand that this isn't just about community service. It's about honoring your daughter's memory and the values she stood for." General Harrison smiled, and this time, it was a smile of genuine warmth rather than sadness. "That's exactly why I know you're the right person for this, Martinez. You understand that this is about more than just checking boxes or fulfilling requirements. This is about creating something meaningful that will outlast both of us." Over the next hour, they discussed the details of what this community outreach program might look like. The general had already done preliminary research into local needs, identifying several areas where military personnel could make a significant impact. There was a struggling elementary school that needed tutoring assistance, a senior center that could benefit from technology training, and a community garden project that required organizational support. Emily always said that the best service happens when you stop thinking about what you can get from helping others and start focusing on what you can give, General Harrison shared as they outlined potential projects. She believed that true leadership meant empowering other people to discover their own strength, not just commanding them to follow orders. Sarah took detailed notes as they talked, but she was also carefully observing the change in the general's demeanor. The more they discussed the program, the more animated and hopeful he became. It was as if talking about ways to help others was bringing him back to life after years of emotional numbness. "I think we should call it the Emily Harrison Community Service Initiative," Sarah suggested tentatively. "That way every soldier who participates will know they're part of something larger than themselves, something that honors the memory of someone who truly understood what service means." The general was quiet for a moment, and Sarah worried that she had overstepped by suggesting his daughter's name for the program. But when he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears of gratitude rather than grief. "She would have loved that," he said softly. Emily always believed that the best way to honor someone's memory was to continue the work they cared about. This program would do exactly that. As their meeting continued, Sarah began to see a completely different side of General Harrison. Beneath the stern military exterior was a man who cared deeply about making a positive impact on the world. The loss of his daughter had temporarily buried that part of his personality under layers of grief and anger, but it was clearly still there, waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. "There's something else I want to share with you," the general said, pulling out a small wooden box from his desk drawer. "These are some of Emily's personal effects that were returned to me after the earthquake. I've been carrying them around for 3 years, but I think it's time for them to serve a purpose again." He opened the box carefully, revealing a simple silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a tree. The metal was slightly tarnished and there were small scratches that spoke of regular wear, but it was still beautiful in its simplicity. "Emily wore this every day," he explained. "She said the tree reminded her that growth requires strong roots but also the courage to reach toward the light. I want you to have it not as a replacement for her, but as a reminder of the values this program represents. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the gesture. The necklace was clearly precious to the general, a tangible connection to his daughter that he had treasured during his darkest days. The fact that he was willing to share it with her spoke to the trust and hope he was placing in their new partnership. "Sir, I can't accept something so personal," Sarah protested gently. "This belongs with you as a memory of your daughter." But General Harrison shook his head firmly. "Emily would want this necklace to be worn by someone who shares her values, someone who understands that real strength comes from helping others grow. You're going to be leading soldiers in service to their community. You need to carry that reminder with you." With trembling hands, Sarah accepted the necklace. As she fastened it around her neck, she felt the weight of both honor and responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of the commitment she was making to continue Emily's work and to help General Harrison heal from his loss. "Now," the general said, his voice returning to a more businesslike tone but retaining its newfound warmth, "let's talk about how we're going to present this program to the rest of the base. Not everyone is going to understand the personal significance of this project, and that's okay. What matters is that we create something valuable for both our soldiers and the community." They spent another hour working out logistics, discussing how to recruit volunteers, how to coordinate with local organizations, and how to measure the program's success. Sarah was impressed by the general's thorough approach and his genuine commitment to making the initiative work. As their meeting drew to a close, General Harrison stood up and walked around his desk to where Sarah was sitting. For a moment, she thought he might be preparing for a formal handshake or some other military gesture. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, much like a father might do with his daughter. "Thank you, Martinez," he said simply. "You've given me something I thought I had lost forever. Hope for the future and pride in the past. Emily would have liked you very much." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she realized the full significance of what had transpired. What had started as a disciplinary incident had become a moment of healing and transformation for both of them. The general had found a way to honor his daughter's memory while moving forward with his own life. And Sarah had discovered a purpose that aligned perfectly with her deepest values. "Sir, thank you for trusting me with this responsibility," Sarah replied. "I promise you that I'll do everything I can to make this program worthy of your daughter's memory and your faith in me." As Sarah prepared to leave the general's office, she could feel the weight of Emily's necklace against her chest, a constant reminder of the commitment she had just made. But it wasn't a burden. It was an inspiration, a tangible connection to someone she had never met but who was already influencing her life in profound ways. Word of Sarah's private meeting with General Harrison spread through the base faster than wildfire. By lunchtime, every soldier seemed to have heard some version of what had happened, though most of the stories were wildly inaccurate. Some claimed Sarah was in serious trouble and would be transferred to another base. Others whispered that she was getting a special promotion or assignment. A few even suggested that the general was showing favoritism because of some personal connection. Sarah tried to ignore the gossip and speculation, but it was difficult when every conversation seemed to stop abruptly when she entered a room. Her closest friends, including Private Rodriguez and Private Johnson, peppered her with questions she couldn't fully answer. The details of her conversation with the general were too personal and sensitive to share, but her refusal to explain only fueled more rumors. "Come on, Martinez," Rodriguez pressed during lunch. "You can't just pretend nothing happened. The whole base saw the general fix your hair like you were his daughter or something. What did he want to talk to you about?" Sarah sighed, pushing her food around on her plate while she considered how much she could reveal without betraying the general's trust. "He's starting a new community service program and he asked me to help develop it. That's all I can really say right now." Johnson, who had no idea that his emotional breakdown the previous night had indirectly led to this entire situation, looked confused. "A community service program? That doesn't sound like the General Harrison I know. The man barely tolerates us being here, let alone wanting us to go out and help civilians." This comment gave Sarah insight into how dramatically the general's reputation would need to change if the Emily Harrison Community Service Initiative was going to be successful. The soldiers on the base saw him as a harsh disciplinarian with no interest in anything beyond military efficiency. They had no idea about his hidden depths, his capacity for compassion, or the personal tragedy that had shaped his behavior over the past 3 years. "People can surprise you," Sarah said carefully, touching the tree pendant that now hung beneath her uniform. "Sometimes there are reasons for the way people act that we don't understand until we get to know them better." The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity as Sarah and General Harrison worked together to bring their vision to life. They met with local school principals, community center directors, and social service coordinators to identify the most pressing needs in the surrounding area. Sarah was amazed by the general's transformation during these meetings. Gone was the intimidating military commander, replaced by a man who listened carefully to community concerns and asked thoughtful questions about how the military could best serve civilian needs. During one particularly memorable meeting with the principal of Riverside Elementary School, Sarah watched as General Harrison knelt down to talk with a group of third graders who were curious about his uniform. His gentle manner with the children was a complete revelation to Sarah, who had only ever seen him interact with adults in military settings. "Are you a real soldier?" asked a little girl with pigtails, looking up at the general with wide, curious eyes. "I am," he replied seriously. "But being a soldier isn't just about fighting. It's about protecting people and helping communities when they need us most." The child nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation, but Sarah could see the emotion in the general's eyes as he interacted with the children. She wondered if he was thinking about his daughter, imagining what it might have been like to visit Emily's classroom in Guatemala. Back at the base, Sarah faced the challenge of recruiting volunteers for the program. Many soldiers were skeptical about spending their free time on community service, especially when it was associated with a general they viewed as unreasonably demanding. Sarah had to find ways to communicate the value of the program without revealing the personal story behind its creation. "Look, I know this sounds weird coming from General Harrison," Sarah explained to a group of potential volunteers during an informal meeting in the rec room, "but this program is about showing the community that we're not just soldiers. We're neighbors. We're people who care about making life better for everyone around us." Private Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite sharing a last name, raised his hand skeptically. "But why would the general suddenly care about community service? Last month he made us scrub the barracks floor with toothbrushes because someone left a footprint on it." Sarah smiled, understanding his confusion. "People change, Martinez. Sometimes life experiences help us see what's really important. The general has realized that our strength as a military unit comes not just from our discipline and training, but from our connection to the people we're sworn to protect." Gradually, word about the program began to spread in a more positive way. Soldiers who had participated in the first few volunteer events came back with stories about the difference they were making. Private Johnson, who had been struggling with homesickness, found new purpose in tutoring elementary school students in reading. His confidence grew as he realized he could make a meaningful impact on young lives. Rodriguez volunteered to help with technology training at the senior center and discovered that many of the elderly residents were veterans themselves. The stories they shared about their own military service gave him a new perspective on the long-term significance of his current role. One elderly gentleman, a Korean War veteran named Mr. Peterson, became Rodriguez's regular partner for the computer lessons. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," Mr. Peterson told Rodriguez during one of their sessions, full of energy and wondering what all this military training is really for. "Let me tell you something, son. It's for moments like this, when you realize that serving your country means serving your community." Sarah documented these success stories and shared them with General Harrison during their weekly planning meetings. She could see how each positive report brought new life to his eyes. The program was working exactly as Emily had envisioned service should work. It was helping both the people being served and the people doing the serving. One evening, as Sarah was walking across the base after a particularly successful day at the community garden project, she encountered General Harrison heading back to his office. It was well past normal duty hours, but both of them had been putting in extra time to make sure the program ran smoothly. "Martinez," he called out as their paths crossed. "How did things go at the garden today?" "Really well, sir," Sarah replied, falling into step beside him. "We helped plant the winter vegetables, and Mrs. Chen taught some of our soldiers how to make compost from kitchen scraps." Private Williams said it was the most useful thing he's learned since joining the military. General Harrison chuckled, a sound that would have shocked any soldier who had only known his previous incarnation. "Emily would have loved that." She was always trying to convince me that growing things was just as important as any military operation. She said that nurturing life required the same kind of strategic thinking as protecting it. As they walked, Sarah noticed that the general seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him. The rigid military bearing was still there, but it was softened by something that looked remarkably like contentment. The program was clearly having a healing effect on him, just as it was building new skills and confidence in the participating soldiers. 6 months after that transformative morning formation, the Emily Harrison Community Service Initiative had become the most talked about program on the base. What had started as a personal moment of healing between a grieving father and a compassionate young soldier had grown into something that touched the lives of hundreds of people, both military and civilian. The official launch ceremony was held on a crisp autumn day, with community leaders, military officials, and local media in attendance. Sarah stood at the podium, wearing her dress uniform with Emily's tree pendant visible above her collar. She had insisted that General Harrison be the one to give the keynote speech, but he had quietly insisted that she should have that honor. "When I first joined the military," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "I thought service meant following orders and completing missions. But over the past 6 months I've learned that true service means something much deeper. It means understanding that our strength comes not from what we can take, but from what we can give." In the audience, she could see General Harrison sitting in the front row, his eyes bright with pride. Beside him sat Mrs. Chen from the community garden, Mr. Peterson from the senior center, and Principal Williams from Riverside Elementary. These civilian partners had become more than just beneficiaries of the program. They had become friends and mentors to the participating soldiers. This program exists because of a young woman I never met, but whose spirit lives on in every volunteer project we undertake, Sarah continued. Emily Harrison understood that the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in classrooms, community gardens, and anywhere people choose to help each other grow. As Sarah spoke, she noticed tears in General Harrison's eyes, but these were tears of joy and healing, not the grief-stricken tears he had shed in private for so many years. The program had given him a way to transform his loss into something positive, to honor his daughter's memory by continuing the work she had believed in so passionately. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself surrounded by soldiers from other bases who wanted to learn about replicating the program in their own communities. Word had spread through military networks about the innovative initiative, and several commanding officers were eager to implement similar projects. "The secret isn't in the logistics or the organizational structure," Sarah explained to a group of visiting officers. "The secret is in understanding that military service and community service aren't separate things. They're two aspects of the same commitment to making the world a better place." Private Johnson, now a confident and accomplished tutor, was sharing his experiences with some of the visiting soldiers. "Before this program, I felt homesick and disconnected from everything," he explained. "But working with the kids at Riverside Elementary helped me realize that home isn't just a place, it's anywhere you're making a positive difference in people's lives." Rodriguez had similar stories to share about his work with the veterans at the senior center. "Mr. Peterson taught me more about real military leadership in 6 months than I learned in all my formal training combined," he said. These older veterans understand that the ultimate goal of military strength is to protect the ability of communities to thrive. As the day wound down, Sarah found herself alone with General Harrison in his office, reviewing the media coverage and planning next steps for the program's expansion. The dynamics between them had evolved significantly over the months. While he remained her commanding officer, there was now also a mentoring relationship that went both ways. She helped him stay connected to the positive aspects of Emily's legacy, while he helped her develop leadership skills that would serve her throughout her military career. "I have something for you," General Harrison said, pulling out an official-looking document from his desk drawer. "Your promotion orders came through." "Congratulations, Sergeant Martinez." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She had been so focused on the community service program that she hadn't even been thinking about career advancement. "Sir, I don't understand." "I thought this kind of work would hurt my chances for promotion, not help them." General Harrison smiled, the same warm smile that had become increasingly common over the past months. "That's old-fashioned thinking, Martinez. The modern military needs leaders who understand that our mission extends far beyond traditional combat operations. What you've accomplished here demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking and community engagement that the military values most. But the promotion, while meaningful, wasn't the most important recognition Sarah received that day. Later that evening, she received a phone call that would change her perspective on everything that had happened. "Is this Sergeant Martinez?" asked an unfamiliar voice with a slight Spanish accent. "Yes, this is Sarah Martinez," she replied, curious about who might be calling her personal phone. "My name is Carlos Mendoza. I was Emily Harrison's supervisor with the Peace Corps in Guatemala. General Harrison gave me your contact information because I wanted to speak with you about the program you've created in his daughter's honor." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. This was someone who had actually known Emily, who had worked with her during those final weeks before the earthquake. "Mr. Mendoza, it's an honor to speak with you. Emily's father has told me so much about her work with your organization. I wanted you to know that the 3 children Emily saved in the earthquake are all doing well," Carlos continued. "They're teenagers now, and all 3 of them are planning to study education or social work when they graduate from high school. They want to help other children the way Emily helped them." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she absorbed this information. The impact of Emily's sacrifice was continuing to ripple outward, inspiring not just the community service program but also the life choices of the children she had saved. "There's something else," Carlos added. "The village where Emily worked has decided to name their new school after her. They wanted to invite you and General Harrison to attend the dedication ceremony. They've heard about the program you've created, and they want to establish a sister relationship between their school and the elementary school you work with." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that the morning 6 months ago when General Harrison had yanked her hair had been the beginning of something much larger than either of them could have imagined. What had started as a moment of grief and recognition had grown into a lasting legacy that connected communities across continents. The next morning, Sarah found General Harrison in his office staring at a new photograph on his desk. It showed a group of soldiers working in the community garden, their faces bright with laughter as Mrs. Chen demonstrated proper planting techniques. In the center of the photo, Sarah could see herself kneeling beside a young girl, both of them carefully tending to a small seedling. "This is what Emily always tried to tell me," General Harrison said softly, gesturing to the photograph. "She said that the most important battles are fought with seeds and shovels, with books and kindness, with the willingness to get your hands dirty helping other people grow." Sarah touched the tree pendant at her throat, thinking about the children in Guatemala who were choosing careers in service, about the soldiers on the base who had discovered new purpose in helping others, and about a general who had learned to transform grief into hope. "She was right," Sarah replied, "and I think she would be proud of what we've built together." General Harrison nodded, his eyes bright with the kind of peace that comes from knowing that love and loss can coexist, that the best way to honor someone's memory is to continue their work, and that sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to the most meaningful transformations. Outside his office window, Sarah could see soldiers heading off to their various volunteer assignments, some to the elementary school, others to the senior center, still others to the community garden. Each of them carried with them a piece of Emily's spirit, a commitment to the idea that true strength comes from lifting others up. The base that had once been known for its harsh discipline and emotional distance was now becoming famous for something entirely different. Its understanding that military service and community service were not separate callings, but 2 expressions of the same fundamental commitment to making the world a better place, one person at a time.